remember that they are changing my voice. This video is about Ezekiel chapters 21 through 25. In chapters 21 and 22, you see Ezekiel is talking about Babylon as God's sword of judgment. He talks about how there's a slayer who's going to wield the sword. Now, the sword is two things again. There's a kind of double thing here in the Bible. It's talking about, first and foremost, God's sword of his spirit punishing the enemies of God with me at his right hand. My soul at his right hand. And the spirit of the righteous with him in his spirit, what have you. Secondly, it's talking about Babylon as a sword, as the sword of their spirit, their idols, their army, okay, and the abuses that they're going to unleash on the people of Israel. It says it several times, that this polished sword, this sharpened sword, this definitive sword, and that these people can't protect themselves from this sword. And we see that in chapter 22, where it talks about the judgment of God on the people of Israel for sinning. And, in chapter 21 and chapter 22, we see that the king of Babylon is consulting his arrows, he's consulting his idols, and God is speaking to him, or allowing him to think things, more specifically perhaps, allowing him to think using his own imagination that God created, to think that what he's doing is smart when it's not smart. And so the Babylonians proceed to think that their ways are superior to what they're not superior to, which is God's spirit, universal, pinpoint, moral precision. So just like we see with martial arts, other martial arts couldn't beat me because their paths are inferior. No offense to anybody, but these are the facts here, through the supernature and through nature. No offense other than the offense that God intended, because you've committed yourself to your mere flesh-based paths and your conception, your pagan conceptions of what spirit is, what the true nature of energy is, what have you. And so we see that the Israelites, the Jews, are compared to dross. They say, you're all dross because you've all relied on your mere flesh. You looked at yourself and said you're shaped like this, or you're a scientist, or you're a rich person, or whatever. And you relied on these kind of false gods, these false idols, these false ideas. And so they're going to be handed over to their demons that they're worshiping in this world. And then when their flesh dies, their soul is going to go to hell. Because keep in mind, when they're here, they think that life is great, and they're punishing the righteous historically. Should they go from punishing the righteous in the flesh to just being blotted out or being allowed into heaven? No. They have to suffer forever as part of the eternal covenant with God and the righteous. So in Ezekiel chapters 23 and 24, you see that it talks about two sisters, and Jerusalem is a cooking pot. The two sisters are Oholah, which is Samaria, and Oholibah, which is Jerusalem. And so they lusted after the idols of Assyria. They led their families and their children astray, and handed the souls over to the spirits of the demons and the idols of the demons. And that's what it means for them to have sacrificed their children to these idols, right? They took this work that God had done historically, making man in his image, right? The Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order, trying to bring people to God. And to some degree, these people went astray and started breeding with other people, what have you. And they mixed together like the idols of Assyria and Egypt, which are combinations or amalgamations. They're basically different ideas of people who focus on their flesh-based traits and worship them as if they're gods or something. And they combine them like Amen-Ra and Jupiter, Amen, and so on and so forth. So it talks about how, Jerusalem is going to be a cooking pot, and these people are going to be the meat. They're going to suffer. And at one point, Ezekiel's wife dies, and it's symbolic of the people who are idolaters, who are dead to God. The inhabitants of the earth after my flesh dies will be dead to God, because there'll be no way for them to marry themselves to God. God won't have any valid representatives on earth. And this is, the kind of pattern of teaching we see in the Bible and the formula, and we see it kind of leading up to this point as the prophets, Hosea, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Micah, they're all talking about the end, right? Amos, the day of the Lord, what have you. Okay, so Ezekiel 25 is about a prophecy against Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia. So the Ammonites, the Edomites, the people of Moab, the Philistines, God says he's going to punish them for their idolatry and for, where they have turned out, where they have enticed those people who are more closely related to me, who are more likely to have obeyed God through me, right? People who are said to have been chosen, and chosen in more than one way, right? God through the righteous reproduced with certain types of people, okay? And for having enticed them to be idolaters, what have you, and for having taken vengeance on them using their scale. So God says he's going to punish them to the extreme. So if you just look at things in terms of universal justice, think about God having set me apart and the people before me in the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order, transcendent, morally precise, monotheistic, what have you, heterosexual. And all these people who are trying to pry the women away from them, who are trying to, reproduce with their children, what have you, and people who have heard various forms of morality that point to me, right? You might say Christian, Muslims, Jews, but it's more than that. It's anybody who's been taught in a way that's very sincere, and quite often those groups aren't taught in a way that's sincere, mind you, who have turned away from the straight and narrow to the broad path of destruction. That's what Ezekiel 25 is about. It's about the prophecy against those four groups, but the Bible works its way up to prophesying against all the nations, right? Isaiah 34, Revelation, when Satan is cast down, and it said he said to lead the world astray, the prostitute, Babylon, Babylon's system, Jerusalem of this world, is said to lead the whole world astray in the spirit of the devil. Okay, the people are said to not repent and stop worshiping demons, so therefore there's some in the demons that come, for example, from the Euphrates, when the Euphrates River is dried up, okay, when their time is up, when, their path turns into a path of increasing the destruction of human worth. And we've seen that in recent years. People have really lost their worth. They become gender neutral. They become ignorant. They become arrogant. They become wicked. We see that in Matthew 24, the increase of wickedness. We just see as their wickedness increases, they become some kind of idiots, some kind of Simpsons mixed with demons, Jetsons mixed with demons. Just these stupid, arrogant people who keep raising their kids to be useless, worthless dogs. And we see the nerd, a lot more nerds these days. Nerds are defined as foolish, as contemptible. We see the arrogance of the rich white and rich Jewish and rich LGBT governing class, right? As they play a contrast game and they look so stupid, so worthless as they do.